national standards for technology. Let us get started. This is the Master Plan Steering Committee regularly scheduled meeting of September 4th, 2024 at 7 o'clock. And let us get started with our agenda. The first of which is review and approval of the June 24th minutes. And do I hear a motion?
I move we approve the minutes.
A second?
Well, let me make one mention. Stasha sent me a correction. So we need to include that correction in with the motion, and I'll show you. If you let me share my screen, I'll show you a second what I can do with that.
Bob, I think it says June 27th on the minutes, at least the copy that I have. I should probably just look at when we met.
I believe that was the correct date that we met, but that's an interesting point if it's not, but I would be shocked
Bob
if.
just said 24 and I was like, I think it's
I
27.
might have wrote it wrong. It's the 27th that we
Yeah, the
met.
27th is what it was.
And that's what's in the
Yeah,
minutes.
so
That's
it's
perfect.
just an error in the agenda, that's no.
Okay,
Anyway,
well, not a
so-
problem with the agenda.
okay,
Maybe a problem with the minute.
so let me share my screen.
Thank you.
So in the first paragraph about the final draft, and I'll make this a little bigger, Stasha pointed out that where we said the percentage of rental properties was clarified, so not was in the wrong place, basically. So the percentage of rental properties did not include 580 Main Street. That we're going to note that they were approved and not yet built, but that the percentage did not include that.
Right.
From what Stasha said.
That was the only.
That's the only change. That's the only change.
Well, then I move that we accept the minutes as edited by Stasha.
Second. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed or abstained? Hearing none.
I wasn't there, yeah.
Yeah, so you should abstain. It's
Yes, I did. So I abstained because I was not there.
Okay,
And
by
I-
majority vote. The
No.
meeting passes the minutes. Thank you. Okay, we have the final comments on the master plan. Pam, if you could go over those. I know we had input from Rebecca. Are those the only
Yes.
comments at this point?
Yeah, everything else so far was incorporated. Rebecca had a few suggestions that I outlined on a separate Word document. If you want to give me a second, I'll pull those up.
Has everybody seen those?
That was super helpful.
Yeah, I thought they were fine.
Me too.
I got in touch with BSC. They are correcting the maps and getting us the. Sorry, I've got too many screens open.
More
They're
accurate.
correcting the maps and getting us the GIS data layers for all the maps so we can have access and manipulate those as we need as the project moves forward and we do updates. So that portion, there were some undeveloped conservation restriction parcels. All of them were pretty recent and they just weren't incorporated into our maps as protected. They were identified as developable property. So those have been they haven't been received yet, but the information was sent to BSC and they're updating the map, and I'll just plug it into the master plan document once it's received.
Okay,
Sounds good.
And these are some edits Rebecca provided. This is from page 16 when we're talking about the Apple Country Natural Climate Solutions paragraph. She project managed that, so she had some suggested edits and things she wanted incorporated into that paragraph. So
That's
her
reasonable.
her comments are outlined in the green underline.
She's a great writer. Thought it made it very clear.
I had no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah, I had no problem with it either.
And then, the next edit was page 86. We were missing 2 cold water fisheries. So she added those. It seems pretty like a no-brainer kind of to put those into the document. And then for the implementation table, she said this assessment was already done, and then, I mean, the data already exists, but she wanted us to clarify if we were actually identifying an assessment. I think it's clear, but we can clarify that wording if you feel it needs to be.
Do we have a way of referencing in the plan the work that's already been done? Because that would be a way to make sure that it was noted. I mean, not to change the wording there necessarily, but somewhere in the plan, and if we're talking about aquifers and recharge areas. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think we can add it to our existing studies list. We have,
Oh, yeah, that'd be good. If it's a real study that way, that would be a very good way to do it.
okay. And then she just for this next one, 6.9.2, she wanted to point out that we can't utilize conservation restricted lands as water resources. So she added this highlighted yellow area.
Oh, that's important.
You know, that brings up an interesting question though about Still River and that whole area, which is in fact under restriction. I'm
It's
not
state-owned,
sure
right?
I understand what the implications of that are with respect to Bolton's biggest aquifer.
And a lot of that land is state, right?
Yep,
Right, that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
I guess the question is there a difference between the treatment of state and the treatment of conservation land? I know conservation land needs a 2/3 vote of the legislature to change it. I don't know
The
about
same
the
as
state
for,
land.
yeah, the same
State,
as for
okay.
state, I believe.
yeah.
So not impossible, but
Well, I think we need to clarify that whether
well,
what we need to go or what would need to be done in order to do what is suggested here with respect to state land. And I'm frankly pretty concerned because that is the most important aquifer in the town. Pam, can you check with Rebecca and see if we can't clarify this a little bit further?
oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just writing that down. Yes, I will do that.
So that would be, yeah, a significant implication. Since we've talked for a very long period of time about access to that aquifer.
And there's not a lot of undeveloped land on Still River Road.
No. There is private land over there, but I think, let's clarify this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the next, she just wants us to recognize the MVP work that was done. And suggested we add continue or expand upon.
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
So it didn't seem like a major change, but an important thing to note and acknowledge the work. And the same thing with the following.
Yeah. Yes, and the corrections to the map.
Yes.
Is add, expand an intended word combination?
No, she wanted us to add the word expand, I believe is how it was
Oh, I see.
intended. Yeah,
So not to take out add and put in
Continue
expand.
or expand, right?
So are we going to change that right now? I hate to send this out with weird typos. So, so page 34, want to, is it add and expand upon, or add or expand upon, or just to expand upon
Right.
in our CLM? Which of these is
Expand
that?
upon.
Expand
Okay.
upon.
So take out the add, AD. On page, the sentence on page 34.
yeah, no, this is just a summary I pulled out of a document. This isn't what, I'll just add expand upon and incorporate.
Yeah. This is like the suggestion page that we're all reviewing and then.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
I'll go
right.
back
more
to the
dramatic.
document.
Yeah,
and-
this isn't the document.
Right.
But I agree with
yeah.
all of these changes with the exception of obviously getting the clarification on the one about the land.
So is there a reason at this point to vote on this, or can we simply accept the comments as we've discussed?
I think accepting.
Yeah, I just didn't want to do anything without informing the board of the suggested changes. They all seem pretty reasonable, and I'll get clarification on 6.9.2.
Yeah, they're not only reasonable, but they're good and correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate the communication, Pam.
Yeah.
So we're gonna vote that or just say that we've accepted it?
No, I think we just accept it and that's it. If there was
Yeah,
any controversy, we might want to vote on it. Okay, are there any other comments, Pam, that we should be looking at?
No. No, those were the only things that have been amended or suggested by staff or other or boards.
Okay, let's move on to the PowerPoint. I know Ken has spent a great deal of time. I've seen his stuff. It was very carefully set up so that the conversation didn't constitute deliberation outside of the open meeting law. So I think it's appropriate at this point for Ken to summarize the rationale behind his comments and then briefly go through the recommended layout of the presentation.
Sure. When I went through the slides, I sort of had two major observations. That it was obvious that a number of the things had been in either the executive summary or the body itself of the master plan tables, or such as we just had up on the screen before, section from the actions and stuff. But the problem with that in a presentation is that they're basically not readable. And so the font size needs to be bigger, and you can't really take a full paragraph of a vision and put that on a slide, and things of that sort. So I thought it needed something in that respect. And then I looked at it as the presentation audience being the planning board, the select board, and then the public, and thought that what we were really looking for was more of a high-level summary than of a detailed walkthrough of the plan. And so what I did then was to go back and reorganize some of the slides, add a few slides, take some things that had been on something imported and make it into two slides that were more readable, and maybe even truncated the language in some cases so that it was more like a slide. And then the ones that I didn't use, I put as backup slides at the end, so nothing gets thrown away, and that way it's possible to use any of them if we, for example, if there was to be a discussion at a select board meeting about municipal services, then we might want to go into the details of the 10 goals and a lot of the other things in detail on the municipal services, even though it's not, even though it's only one part of the plan. So let me show you, and I'll try to be as brief as I can on this, but let me show you what I've got here. So the first thing that I did was to make a title slide, and I don't know whether we want to put a date on it or not, and I don't know whether it should be September or it should be June, but in any case, that I would do something on.
Well,
Then
let me
I
just
thought of
think
some
back.
issues.
I mean, it does have to be September, right? I mean, we have made modifications to the plan as of tonight, so let's stick
Okay,
with
that's
September.
fine, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether the June 30th deadline that we had with the state made any difference, that's the only thing, but no, I agree with you, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be a good idea to have a summary of what was done with the dates on there in one slide to just cover the time. So the fact that we were updating the 2006 plan, when we all got appointed, the fact that we had surveys and public forums and BSC joined us, and then we finished the thing in June. And if you want to say September, that would be fine. But I thought that to just start off by this, it was good. And I didn't see a need in the kind of presentation we're talking about to answer the question of what a master plan is or what state law it comes under or whatever it might be. Can do that, or that could be a backup slide. But this, again, this was the way I was thinking about it. This slide had been in there, and that's fine because that names all of us. And then and I don't remember whether this was written up or exactly how it was organized, but I thought it would be a good idea in one place on one slide to right at the beginning to say what was done in 2006. And this is more or less, I believe, worded the way it was in the original one, but I wouldn't swear to that. So the previous slides, I think, had on one slide had major themes, but they were more wordy and they were all on one page. So I split them up and shortened the wording with all starting with vowels and had the 3 that are there and the ones that are there as major themes. And I actually originally thought it might make sense to organize the whole presentation around those 5 areas. But in the end, I didn't do that. But anyway, so those are the themes and I put them on 2 slides instead of 1. Now, the bold at a glance thing wasn't really readable as it was printed there, but it had useful information on it. And so it seemed to me that you could call that existing conditions, and in doing so, make reference to the fact that there's a whole report on existing conditions if somebody wants to go read a lot of the details. And so I pulled out the key percentages in these things in the land use and in the population area. And then in a second one, put in the housing with the elements that were under that with the percentages. I did not include the financial because it didn't seem to me that the financial, that financial information was that important to the bulk of what was going on in the master plan. We can add that back in, but in any case, this is basically 2 slides that were created from one slide that wasn't as easy to read. I've left this in, but I wanted to make a comment about it, and I'm surprised that we all didn't really notice this before. I'm kind of wondering why we even want to put in the UMass Donahue population projection of our losing population and then remaining steady, so that in the next 25 years, we have fewer people than we have today. And yet we're proposing lots of high density housing that will presumably increase the population. So it doesn't seem to me that it fits, but a population projection may fit. The speaker, whoever it would be, if they're going to have this slide up, needs to say what the basis for these were. And now you can say who they came from, but it also might be good to cite some of the underlying theory, particularly for this one that shows no growth.
Yeah, I've made that comment before, and I would find it very difficult in view of what is recommended and the goals of the plan to talk about the UMass Donahue. I mean, it just,
Yeah, I agree.
you know,
Yeah, so we might want to take,
I
we
would,
might want
let's
to take this
get rid of
opportunity,
it.
at least in the presentation to take the Donahue one out. And it would be okay to leave the other one if we wanted to do that.
Well, I think it may be just worth noting also, just in this discussion right here, that I also got stuck on this slide, and it appears based on my research, and I'm not an expert on these projections, but the Donahue projection it really considers births, deaths, and migration, whereas the MAPC one is looking at anticipated development as well. So that, I looked at that and I said, oh, the anticipated development would be things like our 229 units that are
Right.
potentially getting
Yeah.
built, so it's not that we're not going to gain population. I think it's just that they're not considering the same factors. And so it leads you down this rabbit hole of discussion where you're really trying to focus on the master plan as the overarching topic
Right.
here.
Right.
Okay, so can we agree to get rid of that?
We're gonna leave the
whole slide,
MAPC
or-
projections
Right.
in, right?
No, the MAPC
Okay.
is fine.
Okay,
But
Yeah,
being,
okay.
Take
you
the
know,
other
with
one
all the
out.
things that we've talked about in the master plan, to say, oh, well, the population isn't going to increase. That kind of
Yeah.
flies in the face of the objectives.
Brian, what?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to interrupt the flow too much, but I did just want to share a couple of reactions that I'm having, just considering who the audience is for this. So this is a presentation that somebody would be giving to the planning board and the select board, right?
Yes.
yes.
Initially, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you said initially yes. So and maybe ultimately you have another audience in mind, but I think for purposes of these board presentations, we shouldn't, like, I would suggest we not have more than a handful of slides where we're saying, like, please read the entire thing before this meeting, so that we're not having to walk through what's in the report, but instead it's a discussion about sort of like the implementation stuff, right? Like, what should be on your radar this year? What should be on your radar? Like, I think for the board presentations, we should just cut to the chase and focus on that, because otherwise we'll,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and you'll see, I have some of that, and there's also some of that could be reduced even. But I agree with you completely on that, which was why what I ended up with instead of 40 or whatever was like around 20. But it could even be smaller potentially. This particular slide took two pieces of information that were in other aspects of the previous slides, but completely separate from each other in reporting on the survey. And so I thought it was reasonable to have a slide that showed some survey results, and the speaker could speak to the fact that our municipal services that people identified that they wanted and their percentages and stuff in the report, and that these are things that people talked about of that. And it's not essential to have, but at least it allows you to speak to the survey if you want to, and do it in one slide rather than, well, basically, I don't think there were any slides specific to the survey, but there were some things that had these results included in it. I left out the percentages over here, and even left out a couple of the other things that were there, but highlighted the key services. Now, these are the topics. I chose the word topics rather than chapters, and I struggled with whether to have them all, but for the moment I did. And then immediately jumped to the recommendations in each of the topics. So this, Brian, begins to speak to what you're talking about. Now, there are things that we can have that deal with other things within these if we want to do it, but in this case, I chose the recommendations, and so now these are more or less as written in the slides. It's possible to cut down on the wording a little bit and still get across what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think we ought to get,
But
yeah.
yeah, and I didn't take the time to do that,
No, that's,
but I realized as I was putting these in here that they were wordier than they needed to be,
no,
because you could take this focus on future developments. I mean, you know, you can reword that and save lines, and so that's true with each one of these. But in any case, so I had the land use and then the housing ones, and economic development ones. So I have all the ones that are in there. One thing to think about, though, is what I was mentioning earlier, where if we introduce the themes, and there are only 5 themes, you could potentially reorganize the recommendations under those. But in any case, then after the recommendations, I have some discussion of the implementation matrix. Now, one of the thoughts that I had in doing this was to put this first, but I ended up putting it after the recommendations. But I summarized this from what was in there before, and then put in as an example, not the previous version actually had a full page of this information in it. I put this on here only to speak to as an example. So when we're back here, we can say that we did goals and actions and had schedules and had who the groups responsible were. And we created a table that looks like this and has the responsible parties on the right and the goals and actions in the middle. End of discussion. So to just show something that was there. Now, maybe that's not the best way to do it, but that was what I came up with. And then we had this high priority recommendations. Now that's what I think is really what's key. And this, I did a little bit of editing on, but this gets across, cutting across all of the topics, gets the high priority recommendations that we had in the table, I think it was, that was in some of those slides. And an advantage of having this, so one thing we could talk about is instead of having the all 10 of the things to do with this, and then focus on some of these if we wanted to with any one of the other ones. But this included maintaining the rural character and investigating zoning changes and economic development, and assessing recreational facilities. Now we had this was done in several different ways in the table, but it seemed as if putting it in there as conducting assessment of it, that it indeed was a recommendation, it would be good to do that. And then to update the regulations on climate change, look into the community center, investigate improvements to the town buildings, and then adopt the CPA. Now I put that last because it really funds a number of these things. And it was a high priority recommendation, even though it wasn't within, well, in fact, it was in multiple things across there.
This
Um,
this is a
yeah.
really effective slide, Ken. That's a
Yeah, and
real,
that
that's a
really,
goodie.
yeah, well, yeah, and you know, if there was a version of it in there before, and I just built on that and focus. So Brian, if you wanted to really boil it down, this is the slide to build the presentation around. And you could
Yeah,
make a
yeah.
case of putting this first and then showing some of these other things, but anyway, and then the last slide that I was suggesting was the next steps, and I reworded this slightly, but it gets across what those next steps are, of presenting and then confirming these things and working. And I don't know if the wording is correct here, but I wanted to get across that one of the next steps was the boards and committees working with each other, but the way that action was written up in the original slide, and I think in the plan, was much more complicated than that. And I really wanted to get the point
Mm.
that we need to sit down with people to determine whether these high priority things are feasible. That's really what it boils down to. And so then that's where I stop. And then everything else is are backup slides that could be used or not. I have not timed this, but this is kind of what I envision we would want to say to the planning board and to the select board, and have that as a basis for other things, but it could certainly be shorter based on reworking or re-looking at the way that some of the topics in their recommendations are.
Yeah, I think it's great. You've done a very, very good job. I think in terms of focus and brevity, it might be worthwhile rather, there can be some editing to reduce verbiage, but it might be worthwhile to highlight or bold some of the key things so that you're looking at 5 words instead of a sentence.
Yeah, that would be a way to do it as well, sure. And you could even do that in some of the recommendations,
That's, yeah.
Yeah.
that in each of the recommendations, I'm sure there are some that were more important to the group that worked on it or to us as the committee. And so we could either pare down the recommendations or highlight one and, change colors on them and just indicate that it's relative importance or something. I don't know.
Well,
And
I think,
you've done a really good job, but I do agree with Brian. You're gonna lose them halfway through this. You gotta cut it in half. And then,
I don't think this is gonna be more than 15 minutes, honestly.
but have you ever sat through the attention span of some of these boards? I think you've got to keep the verbiage much shorter and to the point. And if they ask questions, then you can expand on it. But I may be wrong, but I think you got to cut it down.
I think it could be done, Ken, simply by not having complete sentences. I mean, if you just, if you want
some of the
people just to
editing
get the idea.
Yeah, some of the editing I did was intentionally to do that, to not have complete sentences, but I didn't edit all of it.
Yeah.
But I guess the question that I have is focusing on this guy. Does it make sense? Speaking, Penny, to your point here, to maybe have a slide that says that has the topics and said, these are all the topics that we looked at. And in looking at all of it, here's what we came out with. And jump right to this, and then be prepared to discuss any of these that people raise questions about. And if they wanted to know more about the best practices on climate change, then if nothing else, you could go back to this that had some of the specific recommendations here or something like that. I don't know, but
Going back to your list, Ken, that one you had previously, that one.
this one,
Pick the second one. I think you could say investigating zoning changes, colon, dash, housing diversity, and then
that's
preserve
fine.
open space.
That's fine.
You know,
Sure.
knock it down from sentences to bullets.
Mm,
Because you
Okay, and that's
gotta
been
have a
partly
very
done, but that
small
could
amount of stuff sink into their heads. It's not that I don't think they're all intelligent, but they aren't gonna sit and read this, and you're gonna lose them halfway through.
Well, and a natural progression of a presentation like this is that they're gonna see it through the lens of, the planning board, the select board, and they're gonna have their own kind of, uh, they're gonna attach it to certain realities that come from their board. So I think it's a really wise thing to have, like the high priority matrix as one of those backup slides, because I could see somebody saying, okay, well, what is in the first year, what are we looking at here, or something. But let them, if we're going to present this with like the overarching, let the conversation and the people that we're presenting to kind of guide where we go with the post 5-10 minute presentation, and have the slides ready for that discussion. Like, I like your idea of short and then all of the backup slides at the ready.
I mean, under conduct assessment of recreational facilities, you could just say assess recreational facilities and be done.
That's fine.
mm.
Okay,
It's just, all I'm doing is shortening it down because I think their attention span is not gonna get through all this.
well,
Or maybe you have more faith in them than I do.
no, I see it strongly both ways, which is horrible.
Well, you're no help.
No, I think it's very important that in a very short period of time in the introduction, we say, okay, this is what we were supposed to do. This was the intent. This is what we did. These are our findings, and these are the implications to the town, dear planning board and selectmen. Pretty simply and straightforward. I think a lot of this stuff is great. I think the verbiage has to be reduced. I think it has to be bolded into bullets as though, you were campaigning, frankly. And then, as Ken said, have the necessary background reference slides in place were that discussion to come up. And it won't all come up, but some of it will. But if, I think it should be in a reasonable sequence. Here's who we are. This is what we were supposed to do. This is what we did. These are the implications. This is what needs to happen in our view, based on all of our research.
I think
But I
what
think
we,
you've done a really good job, Ken, to get it,
yes,
Yeah, I think
and
it's great
I
job.
think we could, if you look at the, like the last 3 items there, get rid of the pursue, the investigate and do multi-use community center, improvements for town buildings, adopt the Community Preservation Act. Just that,
Yeah, and
without,
the only reason I didn't do that kind of thing was because we went as a group to a lot of trouble wordsmithing some of these things.
mm,
And I didn't want to undercut what we had put in the
Yeah.
plan or what we had talked about. And so, as an example for the community center, we, as a group, made a decision to not say we should build a community center. Now, maybe we were punting
Right.
or maybe we were wimping out, but we didn't. And so I didn't want to fuss with that, but we certainly could do that.
I agree with
I
your
don't
instinct
think you
there,
should.
Ken. I agree with your instinct there, Ken, not to futz with the wording.
Yeah, the question I have, I like, Bob, your idea of the implications to the town. I guess the question is, does any of this do that? Because if it doesn't, then we sort of have to have discussion and come up with what those implications are and what it all really means. And I don't know whether that's actually in the plan, is it?
No, I'm not sure
No.
we need to talk about, I think we need to make our recommendations. As you say, when we get to the details, the implementation plan, the most important part of it is to work with town government and potentially private entities to determine the feasibility and priorities. But to talk about the implications of doing or not doing, that's going to be very difficult to do. Brian, your thoughts?
Sorry, I was unmuting myself. I agree with you. Honestly, the thing that I'm thinking about this from the perspective of the select board, obviously, I think the most important thing for them to hear is like almost like a request that they not leave this document on the shelf and maybe get it like maybe you say, hey, we actually recommend that every year when you're going through the process of setting goals for the town administrator or setting goals as a board, that you take out the implementation matrix and look through and see, okay, what were the different actions where the select board was identified as a potentially responsible party and what was the timeline? Like just sort of encourage this culture of using this document to help shape our decision making.
Hmm.
No, and
The
that's
question is,
a
is
very
it-
good point.
And,
And
that started in the last slide,
Yep.
because that amend plan at 10-year anniversary and update is necessary. But we could easily put in what you just said. Well, in fact, it says, in fact, it looks as if there's missing a bullet that, because evaluate and benchmark tasks annually, that's almost getting at what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
well, and why don't you just make that a separate bullet? To
Mhm.
me, that's one of the most important parts of all of this.
I think it's supposed
Yeah, I
to
don't know
be.
what happened
Yeah.
there.
it
I think
just-
what happened there is that it was not the correct, yeah, it was just, it just
Okay.
wasn't the correct carriage return.
But from a philosophical perspective, and Brian, please weigh in. Who's going to do that? How is it going to be done? How are we going to make sure that as we move forward, both in terms of the advisory committee and individual town boards in aggregate, how are we going to look at the plan and how are we going to make decisions about every year what has come to the top and most important, and how do we determine the community, pardon the expression, return on investment, and that's a social as well as a financial perspective. But how do we go about doing that? And if I were on the select board, I would ask that question. Well, nice plan, guys. How are you going to make it happen? Who's going to make it happen? And in how?
Well, I think that'll depend on the implementation items and action items that are distributed to the various boards and committees. Like a community center likely would end up with a separate committee almost analyzing the feasibility along with some staff assistance. But so it would be that group's responsibility if assigned that task to report back and
And
provide updates to the town.
But also the community center could be the COA and the Parks and Rec.
Sure,
and
You
Sure.
know,
but
Pam,
that
if
just as an example.
Pam,
I
if
th-
I could also just elaborate on that a little bit. So I think part of this is just the culture that the select board and the town administrator help to try to set when it comes to
Mhm.
the use of this plan. So for example, like I can say I fully intend to ask that our town administrator sort of proactively share this report with all department heads and also volunteer chairs of committees should have this and read through it and look what falls under their area. And then collectively, we should just get into the habit of like, oh, does the master plan have something to say about this, right? And
Mm.
it'll take a little bit of practice, but I think with this first year, we can try to model what that looks like.
One of
And
the things
also
we
the
want to
town
do.
Town administrator can remind the selectmen every year, we need to address these issues, or have you address these issues? That person, Marie can be, charged with every year, we want you to remind us where we are in the plan.
Well, we've talked high level that this is like a guidebook, right, for our town administrator. So
Yeah.
and our town planner, like these are the priorities. And the assumption with this presentation is that everybody's going to have a copy of the that have already read through, correct? Our draft, or our I would say
Well,
our,
or at least they'll have access to it. They may or may not have read
Right.
okay.
it first.
So it's definitely not a summary of that. We're just looking for that, that next step, that next.
But could we recommend a programmatic approach to this, such as, the advisory committee in concert with town boards and committee and volunteer groups, and headed basically by the select board, have an annual dedicated meeting to review the current status of the master plan and implementation going forward for the next fiscal year?
You could recommend it. I'm not sure it would get done,
Well,
Yeah, I haven't seen that be successful.
but it's not, as he said, it can't be done.
I'm looking at this from a social psychologist point of view and thinking that one of the things that would be best is to get people excited about this, and not try to get the whole town excited, but to get groups of people saying, yes, this one I want to work on, or this one we should work on. When I think of all the committees that we have in town, they're all volunteers. And I've sat in on some of those meetings. There's no extra time. We're showing them a whole bunch of things and saying, add this to your schedule. And there's no time in their meetings for these things, I don't think.
I don't know.
Unless somebody falls in love with, or one committee, or one board says, number 1, 3, and 6, we've got to do that. We've got to do 3 first, and then we'll get to 1, and then maybe 6. Get them excited about it, and not have them think, oh dear God, I'm so busy now. So how do we do that? How can we go into these meetings excited and get them excited too? I think what Ken has done by tidying up the suggestions is really good. The question is, what do we do, or how do we use these in a way that actually doesn't make people think, oh dear God, I don't have any more time for anything else other than my job right here.
okay, but a couple of things. First of all, who is we? I think that's very important. And how do we establish town-wide priorities and whittle it down to half a dozen things that are going to be done at the highest priority, and then some things after that, so that we don't overwhelm people? I mean, when I take a look at this, and God, wow, boy, there sure is a lot of stuff and interrelated stuff in here. This is kind of overwhelming. Is somebody gonna get their heads together on this and tell us what the highest priorities are and what needs to be done immediately in the next fiscal year or calendar year, and then what part of a longer term objective needs to be done at the same time, but not everything. And that's where I'm concerned that if we leave it to the individual boards, committees, departments, what have you, there isn't going to be a town-wide regular excitement about getting the highest priority stuff done.
Do we
And I
need a
think-
couple more committees?
Oh,
Do we
No, I
need,
don't think,
do we need
no,
volunteers to come up and get excited about
no,
these
you're
things
not
and
gonna
say,
get,
we'll take it over?
I think you've got to live with the existing volunteers and you got to live with the existing committees. Some of them aren't doing much of anything, ag being a classic example. But if we have the select board working with the town administrator, meeting on an annual basis, and I would like it more than that, but it's never gonna happen. Um, and then meeting with the individual boards, perhaps as part of the advisory committee process to establish what the highest priorities are on an annual basis, then it may happen. But at the moment, I mean, the committee, getting committee members to even attend meetings generally is a challenge. And to do work outside of meetings is generally, and I say generally, a bigger challenge, although there are some very dedicated people that go off on their own passion to do certain things. But I'm wondering about, here we have this big plan. How do we review it and refocus on changing priorities and go ahead and make it happen with the full support of town government and the various committees and departments?
I have a question for Brian, because he's been on advisory more recently than I have. This isn't really advisory's bailiwick, is it? Or has it changed since my day?
Well, I think I think they certainly have a role to play in helping to assess like what we can afford to make a financial
Yeah,
priority in
But
any
it comes
given
down to
year.
dollars.
Yeah, I mean, so let me just say, I'm actually quite optimistic that this document won't lie fallow. And I don't want to go into the meeting presuming that we have to take this heavy hand and say, do your job. I actually think there are folks in town hall, and in particular, I think our town administrator and our town planner, Pam, like they want this, they want this plan to be acted upon. So I think we have to, I think it makes sense to urge that, especially at the select board and the advisory level, that they are familiar with this and that they use it as a lens when they're thinking through key decisions over the course of the year. I don't think it makes sense to like make a strong demand that there be some sort of annual meeting specifically about the master plan, because I actually think it would be better for it to be something where we're trying to use it as like a benchmark or guide for decision making all year round. Anyway, and I think our town administrator is going to be a really big help in that.
And also
Yeah,
with certain
and-
things like investigating improvements in town buildings. Well, Randy already knows what needs to be done to the town meetings. It comes down to dollars. And how much advisory is willing in that year to put towards whatever improvement they think is the most critical. But it's really it's down to dollars. It's not that it's any surprise to what needs to be done to the present town buildings.
It also will help with grant applications and simply referencing the inclusion of that item or topic that you're
Yep.
applying for being in the master plan is extremely helpful. You get a lot of bonus points for it being laid out in black and white as a goal of the community. And also, just as an example, so the EDC's been reviewing these drafts of their economic development chapter as this process has been going along, and they seemed appreciative to have some sort of formal direction and input as this plan progresses, and they've already begun working on the agricultural map and interactive map and trying to communicate better with the agricultural facilities in town to help kind of promote their businesses. So things have already been taken up on and started action. So just for simply by putting it in writing and saying, oh, that's a great idea, why don't we begin tackling that item? It seems like an easy kind of task to get going on.
Yeah, it provides a cohesiveness across the, all of the boards, or at least one kind of Bible, if you will, for the town to say, hey, this is what we've all agreed on and we're moving forward with. The one slide that Ken, I think you pulled out, but I would maybe encourage us to put back in, based on this conversation, is the purpose of the master plan, which I know seems, somewhat, elementary maybe for the group that we're presenting to, but it may behoove us to remind folks of that early on in the presentation so that they have that mindset of like, oh yeah, this does, not only does it satisfy a state mandate, but it helps us to coordinate the town actions, and it goes through capital expenditures and looks at growth management and has ideas for that, and there's administrative decisions are coming out of this document. So it lends itself to some of what we're concerned that might not get through in the slide. I thought that was the purpose. This one.
Okay,
And I forgive me for not. I think it's on the back page. It was the second page, number 2. Anyway, so just a thought in the sense of that's very much what we've all been talking about.
Okay.
Is that sorry.
okay, I guess
Conversation.
what I guess in terms of people's eyes glazing over and stuff, that's one of the things I would want to guard against is say, oh, a master plan is this, that, and the other, and it's in accordance with it, it applies to state law, so and so, and things like that. Because that's
Mm.
really,
Right.
may all be true, but it's not really important. What's really important is what we've been talking about the last 5 or 10 minutes of it being a Bible for the town, to a roadmap for the town to be able
Roadmap,
to
that's
use
a
to
better
do
word.
stuff. So,
Exactly.
yeah, I don't know.
I
So
can
we
see
know what the
people
thought-
getting excited about it. People in town saying, I'm really excited about it. Let's, maybe, let's get a group of people together. We'll work on this one. You
I'm
know,
encouraged by what Pam said about how the ADC is approaching it. I think that's how I envisioned it getting.
And I think that would happen with a community center too.
yeah,
There are enough people out there who really want it.
yeah, I
Well,
think you're right.
now that's gonna
Okay.
need, it's gonna need its own committee, a building committee or something, but it needs at least the select board and probably planning board to push it at the beginning, or Parks and Rec and
Well,
COA,
it may get
to
pushed by
push it at the
itself,
beginning.
but at least the only really good thing is there are 2 or 3 communities who have done a really good job from start to finish on how you build a community center and how you meet the needs of the community. And they've documented it really well. So there's this plan on how you do it. So it's not like you're, inventing the wheel.
Mhm.
Well, I would point out, that even where I left in the wording that we used, that we were almost too careful in the wording of things or surrounding the community center, the CPA, and a number of other things that if we're really gonna do it, then they need to get beyond those weasel words at the beginning, because right now, that the thing about the community centers talks about investigating the feasibility of, or something like that, which is not really what we're talking about.
Right.
That we know that people want it, it's just that, I don't know, we've just politically chosen to say investigate the possibility, or investigate the
Mhm.
feasibility of it. Which is okay, but to
Yeah.
form a committee to actually do work on it is gonna need to, I guess, establish that feasibility. And I think that can come from some combination of the planning board and the select board, and it's good if Pam and Marie are pushing it on the day-to-day level.
Yeah, I think
To
it
look
has
into
to come
that
from the
sort of stuff,
selectmen.
and just
If there's gonna
you
be
just
a
have to keep it
specific
going.
board,
Yeah.
it's gotta come from the selectmen.
But I
Well,
think feasibility is the first part, but you're right. What we really need, there's so much talk about it. So it's like pursue a multi-use community center. I'd take out feasibility, just pursue it. Because.
Well,
part of
pardon
what
my
you're looking to do-
skepticism, but I have presented a detailed 2-page plan with a hell of a lot of experience on my part of putting this kind of project together to 3 boards of selectmen and now the second town administrator, and I have seen absolutely no enthusiasm. How do you make that happen?
Hmm,
Go and
Hmm.
find people, Robert.
Penny,
Just like- Just like we did for this board, you go find people. You
Well-
can't wait for them to come to you. You got to go find them.
okay, I don't want to get into this discussion. What I'm
Okay.
saying is, unless there is very high level leadership that is truly believes in this as a priority and finds the people or person to lead it, it's never going to happen.
I can
And
understand.
that's why I'm a skeptic about not going ahead and having a regular review and establishing the 3 things that have to happen. And then those have to be balanced in the advisory committee with the financial realities of the town budget. But I don't see that happening. I think Pam and Marie can work hard on it, but it needs, a full court press, highly focused by the senior management of the town. So I will
but-
now shut up.
So when you say senior management, you talking selectmen?
Yeah,
Yeah, there has to be leadership there. And, they can delegate. They can set up committees to look at it or whatever it is, or appoint some existing committee to be responsible for a particular thing, if the committee is willing to do it.
but they need to
Yeah, they
actively,
they just need to promote it.
right, promote, I think is a very, very important word.
hmm.
You can't dictate, you can't delegate unless you, believe, and there is a rationale for your belief. And then you work with people to make it happen. And I see that coming from the higher leadership, the highest leadership in this town. And that's not a dictatorship. That's 3 people working closely with the departments, specifically planning and the town administrator in this case, and COA and others, and pulling together a group to establish how that's going to move forward. And then, but dare I say, cut that group free to go do what they need to do. But again, monitor their progress in doing it and visit it on a regular basis.
Well, I think we all know your
Anyways,
perspective on this, Bob.
So how do we, what do we do next as far as the presentation is concerned? Does somebody else want to take a crack, or do people want to send me stuff that I can tweak based on what I've heard tonight, or that
No, I
several
think
of us sit down together? What should we do?
Ken, I think you've heard the essence of the comments. I think people are very happy with the overall sequence of the slides. I think it does need to, wherever possible, be reduced and it's bulletized, but bulletized even more so we don't get into a huge amount of wordsmithing. And if people want to ask questions about the details of it, then we can follow up with that discussion. The only thing that, and to Stasha's comment is, well, gee, why do we go about doing this? And I think a simple single sentence, forget all the legislation and all the rest of the state requirements, is it makes good sense to have a master plan as a roadmap for the future of the town. End of discussion.
Okay, that can easily be incorporated into
Yeah,
one
I
of the
mean,
first several slides.
don't get into, section and chapter.
I think you're right. The secret is going to be getting people, first of all, to pay attention to it and then get excited about it. certainly, I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had about the multi-use community center. You know, could we not? Why can't we? Wouldn't it be great to be able to?
Yeah, and I think, and everybody, and Patty's correct. Lots of other towns have done it. They've thought about it, but they've started from square one and they've said, first of all, what is our objective? What is the scope of this effort? What is
Mm.
out there right now? What is the available? What constituency are we going to deal with? What are the needs of the town for that constituency? And, you know, once you have that with some leadership, then you can start making progress. But everybody has a different idea about what a community center is, just the way they had a different idea about what the town common ought to be. Matter of fact, it wasn't a town common when it started. It was going to be housing and economic development. But I think that's where it's very important. So Ken, I think you've done a great job. I think if you can highlight, wordsmith, I think to Sharon's point, we don't need to use a lot of weasel words. We just need to make sure that the topics and the recommendations are in place, and go from there.
Do you want me to take a stab at that and then I can distribute it to everyone?
Yeah, that would be great. Unless Ken,
Right,
you,
so
It's fine.
I'll add a purpose slide, correct the population projection slide. Reduce the length of some of the bullet points throughout the recommendation section. I personally like the implementation high priority recommendation slide at the end.
yeah, I do
I think
too.
as you go through the chapters, it sums it up nicely at the end, and then conclude with a next step slide. Now, my question is, I can get that out probably tomorrow, but who would like to attend the planning board meeting on the 11th and present certain slides? Is the committee interested in doing that after all your hard work?
Well, I'll be there.
I was gonna say, I'm not a fan of presenting, but I'll certainly be
I'd be
back up.
happy to go.
So would you,
Who do you want to present? Someone's gonna
Right.
get up and present it.
I didn't know if you wanted to divvy the slides up by your chapter assignments or you wanted just to attend in the
That would take way
background.
too long.
Yeah, I
That-
didn't,
That
yeah,
would take way too long.
no, it's gotta
If it's
be,
gonna be, if it's gonna be short the way Penny's talking about, then
Yeah.
one person should present it.
And Bob, since you're the chair, even if you're on the planning board, you can still present it.
but you know, I talk to myself anyway all the time. I'm sorry. Yeah, I could do that.
And you know how to be short and sweet.
You are very well spoken.
And to the point.
And you have to go anyway.
And you have to be
And
there
is that-
anyway.
Ma'am,
Is that a joint meeting or just planning?
I have
No,
to
it's just
post it
planning.
as a joint meeting in
You
case we
did-
have
okay,
a
great,
quorum.
What
Yeah.
was the date?
It's September 11th.
right,
Yes.
9/11 to be exact,
But it'll be
Oh,
a
oh,
presentation, both of them though.
What time is it?
7,
7? And where is it?
Zoom.
Zoom.
It's on Zoom, okay.
Are you saying it's more than the planning committee? It's planning and somebody else?
Master
And
plan.
us.
Oh, and us. Oh,
It's
I
gonna
see.
post us,
Oh,
because there'll be enough of us there to.
oh, so
Ah.
it won't be select board, it's just,
No,
it's our group, okay.
when we finish with with a planning board and get
Yeah,
their concurrence, then we'll move on.
The select
okay.
board is scheduled for not September 26th.
Right.
I'm sorry, who is?
Select,
select
Select
board.
board, you said? The presentation is?
yes. Okay, so the game plan is, Pam, you're gonna take a crack at making the modifications that we've discussed. Ken, if you could spend a little bit of time with Pam and doing that, if you guys can get that
Sure.
out to the rest of us, I will more than take a look at it and then make the presentation.
And Pam, I'll send you what, because I made a modification as we were talking, so I'll
Oh,
send you
okay.
this to work with.
Sure.
In fact, would everybody like it or not? Because you could certainly
Oh, yes.
provide comments.
Oh, yeah, please do.
If people wanted to
Yeah.
do that, so I'll send it to everyone and we can go from there.
Yep.
All right.
But, bottom line, I think it's a very good presentation, and even if a lot of people inevitably are not going to read the entire plan, they really will get a very good flavor of what's in it and what needs to happen. So thank you, Pam. Thank you, Ken. Well done.
Oh, it was fun, actually.
Good.
Brian.
No, that was just a clapping emoji.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was the Queen's wave. I'm sorry. Or maybe we are not amused. Penny. Okay. Any other business?
Do you want a motion?
I would like a motion.
I move we adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much. It's been good.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Have a
Lynn.
great night. Thanks, guys.
I talk at you, Brian.